there, everybody. Matt O'Ree. Welcome back to Mob on TV, the official Matt O'Ree Band YouTube channel. If you haven't clicked subscribe, please do so. Also, smash that little bell icon. You'll get emails and updates on every time I upload new videos. So we're off to a running start in my new series, my mini-series called Tech Talk. Hope you liked episode number 1 with what's in your gig bag. Today is the first part of a multi-part of videos called Strings and Things. And we're going to be talking about the strings that I like, also how I string certain guitars, because certain guitars have different style tuners. And I have some tricks to show you that might help you right now or down the road, or however you're dealing with string changes, especially for the new guys out there. So let's jump into it. Today we're dealing with vintage style Calusin split shaft tuners. These are the tuners that were mostly used in the 50s and 60s style Stratocasters and Telecasters. My favorite era of Fender. So let's jump into it. Okay, we're here with my 1961 Fender Stratocaster, talking about split shaft tuners in the vintage style. Well, of course it's vintage style, it's 1961. But they also offered these tuners on, I think, a lot of their vintage models as well. There's some positives about the split shaft tuner. One of the things I love about it is that if you do happen to break a string in the heat of battle on stage, that the string generally will come flying right off the tuner because it's not threaded through the side hole or post hole. So I do like that about the vintage style tuners. I guess the one downside to them is that it can be easy enough to not string it properly, meaning not having enough string windings on the shaft of the tuner because you have to pre-cut these strings before you use them. We'll get to that, of course, with the Gibson next week's episode, where you don't have to pre-cut the string when you're stringing the guitar. So I do like that about these vintage style tuners, is that when you do break a string, generally if it's the E or the B or the G string, plain steel, it'll come flying right off and it's gone. It's not hanging there in your way. But with Fender style guitars, you might not still be in tune to finish the song with that guitar anyway. But at least the string's not, in your way, which I do like that about the split shaft style tuners. Strings that I'm using, I like GHS strings. I actually love them, I should say. I've been using them since I was a kid. And the reason why I use these is because my grammar school friend who helped me get started with guitar, he was a few years ahead of me in guitar, he said that you should check out GHS strings as a kid, and I fell in love with them, and I've been using them ever since. I'm fortunate enough to be endorsed by GHS too. If he had been using Ernie Balls, I might have went that direction. It's just amazing how things in your past stick with you for a long time, and I happen to be a creature of habit, so I just love GHS strings. All of my electric guitars, I use 11 through 50 GHS boomers. That's just what I like. That doesn't mean that 11s or the heavier strings or 12s. I know Stevie Ray Vaughan was using 13s. It's to each their own, because we know that some of the greatest guitar tones in rock and roll were probably done on 9s and 10s too. So there's some really great videos out there of people comparing string gauges that I just stumbled onto, and it was pretty interesting to hear the difference between 9s and 11s. 11s do give you a better clarity, I think, but it is a little bit more harder to play on them. I've worked my way up to them over years and years of practice and performing. So, but I like the tension of 11s. I like the way they sound. It works for me at this point in my career. Maybe down the road I might switch to 10s or 9s. Who knows? I know Billy Gibbons is one of my big heroes, and he's using a 7 gauge strings now, which is like, wow, it's like playing on, on human hair, I guess. But it works for him. So is it wrong? No, of course not. And he still sounds great. He still sounds like Billy. What I firmly believe in, even with all the equipment that I've talked about in all these episodes, including this vintage Stratocaster, which to a lot of people this is a holy grail instrument. 1961 was a great year for Fender, and in their instrument making process. So, but it's definitely, the tone is always from your hands. So if you stick around on this planet long enough and don't get dead, I hope you don't, and you practice long enough and play long enough and keep working at it, I honestly think that your technique will outweigh the importance of the equipment. And I can't believe I'm saying that because I'm a big collector of equipment and I love vintage instruments, and they have such a vibe and a sound and a tone like nothing else. But it's still in your hands, and that's the most important thing to remember. So just because I'm using 11s, that just happens to be what I like. So you might like something else. Again, to each their own. I can't stress that enough. So with these tuners, how I change the strings on this particular guitar, the tension is still on them, so I want to take the tension off before I take the strings off. So I can do that with a simple string winder, or I can make it even easier on myself and use a string winder attachment for my power screwdriver, which is obviously faster. And strings are all nice and loose. Now I could just cut the strings. I usually cut it right about the edge, the end of the neck. And there's a reason for that, and I'll tell you in a second. Okay, now my strings are off. Now again, with these split shaft tuners, this is one of the coolest things I think about them, is that once I'm off the string tree, they come right off, and that's it. Now I always, and most people do on Fender guitars, I always leave the back plate off. I do have the original back plate for it. Of course, I kept it nice and safe, but I keep the black back plate off because it's easier and faster to change strings than trying to thread the string through the hole in the back plate. It just gets in my way. I don't need it. I just leave it off all the time. Ironically, years ago when I got into Fender guitars, I don't know why I did this, but I always left out the fifth spring in this position. And I don't know why I did that. I think I found that it seemed to stay in tune better for me. Again, to each their own. Ironically, I was at the NAMM show last weekend, 2020, and I got a chance to catch up with Eric Johnson, and they released a new signature Eric Johnson Strat that's made out of sassafras, which is a whole nother story. You could read about it on his website, I'm sure. But ironically, Eric Johnson left out this same exact spring. Now, I didn't know that he did that. Maybe there's something about that. I've seen people have all five. I've seen people leave out the middle one. Again, I don't know why I decided to do that, but it seemed to work for me. So being a creature of habit like I am, I like things to be the same in consistency. So all my Strats have the same thing. I always leave out that one spring. With the 11s, it still gives me a nice, a little bit spongier feel on the tremolo. But why I left that one out, I don't know. It was just a guess, and it's just ironic that Eric Johnson does the same. Again, Eric being probably one of the nicest people I've ever met in the music industry, and one of the most humblest, greatest musicians and guitar players. He's just fantastic. I can't say enough about him. Anyway, so back to the front side. So just thread the strings back out through the hole in the back side of the guitar. We all pretty much know how to do this, I think, at this point. For people that are just tuning in, that might be tuning in, that are new to the guitar, this gives you a little insight. Now, I always keep an eyeball going through these holes, even after I get all 6 of them out. I know I took out 6, but I just want to make sure that there's nothing stuck in those holes, maybe like an old ball that got stuck in there. The nice part about the vintage-style tremolo systems is that the ball sits flush with the end of the block. Not all tremolo blocks are like that. The old ones are, which is great. So usually when you break that string, if it does happen, the ball just boop, falls out because some people might not realize that the ball's still in there, and they'll go put a new string in and jam the other ball in there even harder. And then you're going through the front of the bridge plate with like a toothpick or something trying to get the other ball out at some point. So always put an eyeball through those holes just to make sure that you got all the strings out. Okay, GHS, again, can't say enough about these guys. They're awesome. They make awesome strings. Absolutely love the way they sound. I always go through them after I pull them out of the package. Again, me, the creature of habit. And I just make sure that they're in the correct order of size. Because as I'm threading up this guitar, I don't want to have to think, oh, did I have the right one? What am I doing here? So I always go through and make sure it's 11, 15, 18, 26, 36, and 50. So I know that the low E string is sitting right on top, and then I can start threading up the bridge of the guitar. One thing I like to do is I like to put all 6 strings in the bridge all at the same time. That way when I move on to the headstock and threading the strings properly through the tuners, I'm not doing it one and then I have to go back to this again, I have to go back to that again. So that way I have all 6 strings that are sitting there ready to be strung up. Okay, great. So now I got all the strings there. Now, if I wanted to polish the frets or condition the fretboard, obviously now's a good time with the strings off. You can use 0000 steel wool to just lightly clean the frets off. It helps take any of the slime that might have came off your hands in the middle of the summertime sweating at gigs. These frets are pretty clean right now, so I'm not going overboard on this. And then you can also use a little bit of fretboard conditioner. There's a bunch of different stuff out on the market, of course, for purchase for that. Take a used rag and just kind of wipe that in. Okay, so after that's done its thing, now it's time to start threading strings. So I always pull this up all the way so I know that the ball is seated all the way in the bridge block. So I know there's no extra slack, because if there's extra slack, it's going to throw off your measurement for how much string you need. Now I kind of have a little bit of a system that I came up with, and I'm sure it's a system used by a bunch of people. I didn't really come up with anything. I just discovered that it worked for me. So from the tuner where it would attach to, again, we have to pre-cut these strings before we put them in the tuner. And they're going to go down into the hole of the tuner, into the shaft, and then bend over through the slot, and then start winding on a downward angle. Now, there's a lot of discussions on whether it should be downward. Again, to each their own. I'm just showing you things that work for me, work for this guitar. I've never had any tuning issues with it. Okay, so I know it's seated properly, and I'm going to line it up with the first tuner of where it normally gets attached to, and I'm going to go to the next tuner and the next tuner. And since it's the thickest string, I'm going to cut it right about there. So we're looking at the D string tuner. I'm going to go a little bit past that, and that's where I'm going to cut my string. Okay. Now I should have exactly the amount of winding that I need and nothing more than I need. So I won't have too much winding on the tuner, but I won't have not enough. If you don't have enough, it's going to keep slipping and never stay in tune. So it's down into the shaft of the tuner. I'll give you a close-up video of this too as I'm doing the rest of the tuners as well. Okay, make sure that the A string is seated properly. Again, A string tuner, 1, 2, and a little bit more than that. That should be just good. Cut the string down into the shaft of the tuner, bend it down, and wind it up. And that's it. Now I just stretch them out real good as I keep tuning the instrument. So there we have it, the first part of Strings and Things in my mini-series called Tech Talk. Hope you got some info out of this. Once again, go to my website, MataReband.com. Check out our tour dates. We're probably going to be in a city or town close to you. Come out and see us. Also, we have new merchandise, t-shirts, hats, all kinds of goodies on the website, plus free downloads of our new singles. Any questions, please feel free to email me at info@matalre.com. We're going to be back next week with another part of Strings and Things. We'll be dealing with Gibson-style tuners or the other Calusins that have a side post hole. how I deal with that, how I string that. It's a little bit different than the split shaft in the Fenders. We'll see you then. Thanks.